almond was made out of this material and made in this color. So soft. So soft. And we are live. Welcome to the MLB Strategy Show. It is Thursday, September 2nd. I am Josh Engleman. I am joined by Adam Scherer. We are here to break down a 5-game main slate, a very pedestrian Thursday in baseball. We'll touch a little bit on the early slate so that everybody in chat doesn't absolutely freak out the moment that we don't do that, but we have plenty of time on a day like today. So before we get started, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, all that good stuff. The same things I say every single day, but then go to Awesemo Odds, do those things. Go to Awesemo Fantasy Football, do them again. And shout out to the presenting sponsor of this show for today. First time in a while, we're going a little different for the strategy show. What up to Jock Market? We'll talk a little bit of Jock Market in the near future. But first, let's start here. Adam, how did your Wednesday go?
Baseball-wise, didn't go too well, but we got pretty lucky, and we got really lucky in Baltimore weather-wise. So I'll take that as a win. We got some rain and wind, a couple tornadoes touched down in Maryland, but not in Baltimore. But seeing pictures from like Greg and Lofty's neighborhoods, feel like Wednesday went pretty well for me.
Yeah, I think you and I got out of this one pretty well. Normally, I am the guy that's like, hey, I've got a hurricane. I'm going to need coverage for something. Turns out I'm dodging this one. You seem to be fine. But yeah, a lot of pictures from Lofty that didn't look great. I know things were not going well for Greg either. It's a good time for me to not be in the Northeast.
It was nuts. I was paying attention to the Dark Sky app all day because we were like in and out of tornado warnings. But like just seeing the massive storm and then like the dot where I am is just like getting touched by like the very outer edge and it's just going right around. And then just smashing Lofty, basically.
That tornado video that Lofty put into our personal DM section was truly terrifying. That was way too thick, and I was not happy to see it. My wife is terrified of tornadoes, hates to see them on the news because we'll immediately have like negative dreams for them that night. I was just like, I know you're not going to see this, but just know. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, the one of like the bridge with it rolling through, like it was a bad movie. Like it would have been like, it's like
that's the way that I described it. I was like, this. You would say that this is too big and you need to dial it back,
right?
And it was real. It scared the shit out of me. I don't want any part of that stuff. I also don't want anybody. I hope everybody's good. Anybody that normally watches this, or even if you don't normally watch this, like I hope you're getting through it. That kind of stuff is not fun. It's been a not great, past couple days for the eastern side of the United States in terms of weather. So best wishes to anybody that has been affected with it. We got 5 games for the main. We're going to have more than enough time to talk through that and really hash out some decent strategy stuff given how big a single Coors game is on a 5-gamer. So we'll touch on that there, but let's just kick it off now. Let's talk a little bit about this early slate. We do have updated everything across the website. So I'm looking at the early for DK, 3-gamer, top stack, Oakland. A little bit of negative leverage, but nothing too crazy for this slate. The biggest negative leverage spot is the San Francisco Giants. I think that's relevant. Philly is our number 2 stack. They are slightly positive for leverage. What are you seeing when you look at the top stacks tool, or what are you seeing just for hitting in general for the early?
Yeah, it looks like out of the teams that are at the top in terms of probability, Philadelphia getting a bit less ownership than they deserve. Oakland maybe getting a little bit more than they deserve. Obviously, a very, very good spot for Oakland, but it's a pretty good spot for Philly as well. Espino not particularly good. We know Matt Manning's not good. Oakland's lineup is better. Like I get why they are getting more ownership, and they also do have the highest top stack percentage. But it looks like moving some of that Oakland exposure to Philadelphia would make sense. And then you also actually have Washington going a bit under owned. I think, clearly a very, very dangerous matchup against Nola, but on a 3-game slate, I'm a lot more willing to go up against ace pitching. Wish I had done that on the early slate yesterday. I just decided to play Darvish in all of my lineups, and then Arizona won the slate. But, this is definitely one of those spots where if this is, an 8-game or a 9-game slate or something, we're not even talking about Washington bats. But on a 3-game slate, opportunity cost is lower. Ownership on Nola naturally is going to be higher because there's only 3 games. So Washington, I think, looks like a pretty good play too, even though they're not very likely to succeed.
3-game slate, so 6 teams. If you're playing 150 lineups, is your assumption that you have at least some of every single one of them?
You probably should. I tend on smaller slates, I tend to get really concentrated a lot, which I'm not really sure is the best strategy. It just, it kind of, I guess it goes back to just, sort of your risk tolerance and what you want to do. I think for me personally, I probably should change something because I kind of just end up getting all or nothing on short slates. Like, for example, yesterday, I think I had 94% Darvish and I had, I don't know, like 60% of a bunch of the Astros hitters. So it was kind of just like, okay, well, if the Astros and Darvish do well, I have like every combination, but if they don't, I'm going to lose literally every entry. And that's basically what happened. So it kind of goes back to your risk tolerance, but I do think that you could certainly make a case for where you have, at least a little bit of every stack, whether that's over or under the field.
Because I know, like, we talk about it a lot, and I just wanted to, now that I'm thinking about it and looking at the top stack tool, even Milwaukee has a 9% chance of being the top stack. Right. So even if we just sort of consider that to be like the general floor in this scenario, that's going to happen pretty frequently, all things considered, especially if they're showing up as a positive leverage team. I didn't know if you had any thought process to just immediately saying, I'm going to end up with a little bit of every single offense just by default. Like pitching, I could see getting away from in a way, depending on how it's breaking. But for hitting, felt like you would want a little bit. I'll say this. When I play short slates, I tend to end up more like you, where I end up ultra concentrated. Feels like I never had, like I'm either winning very significantly or taking an absolute beating on short slates.
And I think it also does. I mean, and this kind of goes without saying, but it depends how the slate sets up. Like today, I would expect not to be quite as concentrated. Yesterday, if I remember correctly, Houston, there were like 3 teams at the top in terms of top stack percentage. 2 of them were projected to go under-owned or over-owned. Houston was projected to be way under-owned, but then also the teams at the bottom, because they were such good values, like Texas, were also projected to be over-owned. So yesterday's slate, it kind of was just like every team's getting more ownership than they should, except Houston. Whereas on this slate, Milwaukee not getting as much as they should, Detroit not getting as much as they should, Washington under-owned, Philly under-owned. I would expect to be a little bit more spread out here.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about pitching then. Early slate. Is there somebody like floating in the ether for the early? Is that the problem here? We have 5 names on top pitchers.
We don't have the speed knowing
TBD
yet.
On the Marlins. Yeah, got it.
Wait,
just making sure I saw it.
Wrong slate. We haven't loaded a speed knowing yet.
Yeah.
Marlins are on the main slate.
What just refreshed here? 1, 2, 3. Oh, that was weird. It's just so close to the top of the list on the MLB.com thing that I just assumed that was the piece included, but I'm already into 7:00 games. It just doesn't usually move that quickly for me. All right, let's talk a little bit about top pitchers then. Frankie Montas, Aaron Nola, Logan Webb, all basically the same top 2 pitcher odds. They're all in the low to mid 50s. All 3 guys, well, 2 of those guys are in the 60s in ownership. Logan Webb at 47%. How do you see pitching shaking out, and how does that open up things for, say, Lauer and Manning, and eventually Espino?
Yeah, so at the top, I kind of just expect it to be a situation where I get more Webb at the expense of a little bit of Montas and Nola. Clearly still going to roster Montas and Nola, but they have very, very similar chances of success. So whoever ends up being the lowest owned out of that group is someone that I typically am just going to be overweight on at the expense of the other guys. Lauer, it's a really tough matchup, but he does, still have basically a 1 in 3 chance of being a top 2 pitcher here, only getting about 20% ownership, and also at a price point that is basically an island at 7,500. So, not going to feel great about getting to Lauer, but he does look like maybe going a little bit under-owned here.
Yeah, Lauer is showing up pretty significantly positively leveraged. So just let's try to put these pieces together. Lauer showing up significantly under-owned, 34.5% odds of being a top 2 pitcher, 22% in ownership. We look at San Francisco. Interesting top stack odds. Do you how do you look at this differently on a 3-gamer in comparing top stack odds along with the pitching piece of it? So we're usually looking at hoping that another pitcher is pulling some ownership, try to get a little bit of additional leverage on the opposite side. Is that more ramped up for you in this spot?
I think it just kind of naturally ends up that way for me because the opportunity cost is lower. So things get pushed up a little bit more. There's, obviously just not as many teams, not as many pitchers to compete with, not as many offenses to compete with. So the leverage component just ends up factoring in a bit more.
Like the example for this one, we obviously see Lauer as under-owned in comparison to his odds of being a top 2 pitcher. We see the Giants with a 14% odds of being a top stack with a 21% ownership share, the biggest negative leverage team. Does that double count for you? Does that end up pushing?
Yeah.
It ends up going both directions.
Yep.
You want to get more Lauer and then less San Francisco because of it. That is how it's going to play out for you.
Yeah,
I don't mean like in terms of like this is what I'm doing, but like logically.
Yeah. Like when I am deciding what lineups to play, I'm looking at both the pitcher, how much the pitcher negatively correlates with the field and how much the stacks do. So it would go both ways.
Okay. Good to know. Anything else you want to touch on for the early slate that stands out to you?
No.
All righty. Well, then we shall move on to the opener for the main slate. We're going to start Mets and Marlins. 4.3 run implied total for the Mets, 3.3 for the Marlins. And I think it should be lower than that. Carlos Carrasco going for New York. Zach Thompson going for Miami, as best I can tell. Carlos Carrasco is currently projected for 60% ownership on the DK slate. That is the chalk option today at 8K. And I completely agree with it. I got him in for 5 innings. He's facing a terrible Marlins offense. I don't really see much wrong here. I think Carrasco looks good at 60%. Might open you up to a little bit of Marlins stacks on this 5-gamer, which I think that we could start to talk about. But talk to me a little bit about Carrasco.
Yeah, it's just like I don't have a ton of confidence in Carrasco because, he has only thrown 78 pitches in each of his last 2 starts. We've kind of seen mixed results from him since coming back, but there's not a lot of alternatives on this slate. Shane McClanahan's really expensive and he's facing Boston. Rodriguez is facing Tampa Bay, which is a tough matchup. McKenzie's priced up, which is fine, but like there's not a lot of really good pitching here. You have a Coors game, you have a Cubs game where you have Keegan Thompson facing Mitch Keller. Obviously, we'll talk about those guys, but there's just not a lot of alternatives to Carrasco. So I think the ownership makes sense. If he's going to give you around 80 pitches against the Marlins, he's going to be one of the top pitchers pretty often.
Any Zach Thompson for you? Showed up for me in 6% of my lineups.
So he's not confirmed yet, right?
No.
Okay. Yeah, but
by the way, he's 7,500 just in case you don't have that.
I was going to say 7,500. I think it's okay. The issue is just like he's not going deep into games at all. He hasn't thrown more than 80 pitches in 5 straight starts. He's been between 72 and 77 pitches, been getting pulled basically after 4 or 5 innings. So it's pretty clearly by design that they're not letting him work deeper, which is obviously concerning because it does cap your ceiling a bit. It puts him in that same ballpark though as Carrasco. Like I'm not expecting Carrasco to go deep or, to throw like 90 pitches. I think there's a better chance Carrasco does than Thompson does because at some point you would think that they just kind of turn Carrasco loose, whereas the Marlins seem to just intentionally be limiting Thompson. So I think if the ownership on Thompson is low, which we don't have him in right now since he's not confirmed, but if the ownership's low, he's certainly someone you can use as a pivot away from Carrasco. Like right now you have the 60% ownership going to 8K Carrasco. You have 31% going to a $7,200 Mike Minor. If Thompson comes in, let's call it 15% or something, and those hold true, I think that works as a pivot, but it's not someone that outside of ownership considerations, it's not someone I'd be really excited about.
Bored Ape 7090 sold on OpenSea for 600 ETH, 2.25 million.
I hate myself.
Oh my god, it's so
I don't care that I missed punks. Like even when I knew about punks, it was like 40K, and I was like, I'm not putting 40K into this. I just completely ignored apes. I hate myself.
I mean, look, we weren't ready for it yet.
It was just laziness on my part. Like I knew about NFTs. I just didn't bother getting in and should have.
That is staggering. Can you imagine if you just like minted that for 0.04 or something stupid or whatever the mint price was?
And it was also pre-downswing. Like I had plenty of money to just throw around.
Sure. All right, let's talk a little bit about hitting here. I have the Mets 6th. I have the Marlins dead last. That should not be terribly surprising. How do the Mets look to you? To me, they're just sort of like a team that's on this slate.
Yeah, that's pretty much how I feel. Assuming Thompson or whoever's pitching for Miami doesn't pull much ownership, that's obviously not going to help out. 4.5 implied run total. You do have pretty favorable pricing here. Alonso's down to 4,500. Conforto and Nimmo remain really cheap. VR potentially leading off at sub 4K. So they are a stack that looks pretty affordable. They're actually not getting that much ownership right now either, which I guess makes sense because of the Coors Field game. But yeah, just middle of the pack, I think, in terms of top stack percentage. Thompson's not a bad pitcher. I'll use these guys as value, but I doubt that I end up getting crazy amounts of Met stacks.
Yeah, like I said, sixth for me, sixth in leverage. They're just sort of filler. Maybe a couple of them exist. We'll see if Thompson gets any ownership, but I don't have anything there. Let's talk about the logistics of wanting to roster the Marlins against a 60% owned Carlos Carrasco.
Yeah, it's purely the Carrasco ownership. The opportunity cost on this, it's still relatively high since you do have that Coors Field game with a 12.5 total, but otherwise it's not, there's not that many good offenses either. Like we already said, there's not a lot of great pitching, but like the two outside of Coors, the best offenses are facing actual good pitchers in the Tampa Bay game. So that, knocks them down a bit. In the Cubs game, you have just two terrible offenses. So like, yeah, they could do well, but you're not really upset about missing out on them. Cleveland and Kansas City isn't great either. So I think the opportunity cost outside of Coors Field is low enough where Miami does probably will pop a bit just because of Carrasco's ownership. Like I'm not going to be too upset that it's, I get a little bit less Cubs or a little bit less Pirates or whatever at the expense of getting Miami against a 60% owned pitcher.
Yeah, I barely had these guys come up in the crunch. But 60% on Carrasco sort of changes the game. This is just, they're a truly bad offense clear across the board. 88 aggregate weighted runs created plus for me today. But you have to factor in the fact that Carrasco's getting, 2/3 of the ownership.
Yeah. The other thing that's going to make it difficult to roster the Marlins is you have to choose two other pitchers.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You're probably looking at Shane McClanahan, Erod.
Yeah, like that's probably what you're going to do because they're so cheap. You can afford those guys. You also can certainly go to the Wrigley Field game. You can go to McKenzie. Like there are other pitchers that you can get to, but it's just like having to choose two of those guys is not gonna feel great. Miami's offense, like they're bad, but they do at least have some power. Alfaro's got power, Anderson's got power, Brinson's come around a bit lately. Chisholm is supposedly going to be a good player. So they're bad, but like they at least still have some semblance of talent in the middle of their order.
This is going to be a wild one given that Carrasco ownership. I'm intrigued to see it. Do you have anything else you want to touch on here for Mets and Marlins?
Nope.
All right.
Somebody said Alex S. Thompson at 8.9% owned. I hadn't looked at the actual ownership. He's just not in the top pitchers tool.
I don't have him in the ownership either.
Maybe. Oh, they were probably talking about Keegan.
Okay.
Yeah, they were talking about Keegan.
That makes sense. Okay. Schedule for the rest of the day. Buckle up. And I need to make sure that this hasn't changed again because we had a little bit of stuff going up in the air here. All right. So 4 p.m., I believe this is correct. MMA Strategy Show. Jason Floyd, Pete the Heat Rogers, talking a little bit of UFC for this Saturday. Then from 5 to 6, MLB Live Before Lock. No deeper dive tonight. We're going straight to Live Before Lock. We're going to be an hour early as well. That's going to be myself and Terry. I think Greg's going to be out of commission from the rain. Then at 6 p.m. from 6 to 7, we're going to get college football Live Before Lock. I think it's 6 to 7. So they must be going long because the 6:30 game got canceled. Okay. So they're going to go from 6 to 7. That's going to be Ben and Matt Kajeski breaking down college football today. Plus, go check out the breakfast menu. Ben and I are giving out some college football best bets. And then I guess you guys, you're going to be going live tonight for the Awesemo fantasy football draft, huh?
Yeah, we will be live streaming me out drafting all of our people that actually talk about football.
Shots fired. Free content today, MLB top pitchers. So if you are looking to check out what we have behind the paywall, today is a good day for that because the MLB top pitchers tool is free. Look for Nightbot to drop that link or just simply go to awesemo.com and browse your way to it. All right, we got 2 more games now to touch on before I got to rally for something else. Rays and Red Sox, 4.2 run implied total for the Rays, 3.3 for the Red Sox. Shane McClanahan and Eduardo Rodriguez. McClanahan at 41% ownership, Eduardo Rodriguez at 23% ownership. I have Shane McClanahan slightly over-owned. I have Eduardo Rodriguez slightly under-owned. To me, they look very similar today. Erod getting the savings of $1,100 is really helping there. How are you looking at both pitchers?
I agree with what you said about McClanahan versus Rodriguez. They are two of the highest upside pitchers on the slate. McClanahan's been very good so far, 27.7% strikeout percentage. Rodriguez, 27.5%. McClanahan's got a 3.24 xFIP. Rodriguez at 3.48. Probably a little bit more difficult matchup for McClanahan in terms of strikeouts, but also a little bit weaker bottom of the order potentially for Boston. I think it's just a really, really similar spot for these two pitchers. So I don't have a really strong preference between them. If you were to tell me the ownership's the same, like if they're priced the same and the ownership's the same, I would basically just be flipping a coin between these guys. But given that McClanahan is more expensive and pulling more ownership, this is a spot where I would anticipate there's a good chance where, let's say I get to, 65% combined ownership like we have projected, where I just kind of give more to Rodriguez, take some away from McClanahan. Sort of like we talked about yesterday with Sale versus Carlos Rodon. Obviously, Sale didn't work out, but that's the kind of play where very, very similar range of outcomes, similar price points, just different ownership. I typically just end up flipping it.
Yeah, McClanahan at 41, Erod at 23. They came out of my sim at 33 and 31, and I think that looks pretty reasonable. I don't have anything else to add. Like, they're clearly good options. Terrible spot for both guys. Although this Red Sox lineup is not as daunting as it normally is. There are a few not ideal bats, and I think that's helping out quite a bit here. But either way, these are two of the guys that you need to be looking at. From a hitting perspective, I have the Rays as my number 8 stack. I have the Red Sox at number 9. But there is some positive leverage to be had. One, both pitchers are going to be pulling, let's just say conservatively, both guys are going to be around 30% ownership. Neither side of this game is getting any love from a bat's perspective. We have Boston dead last in the top stack tool, under-owned. We have Tampa Bay 8th, under-owned. I think I like getting to the offenses here. It's not going to be fun. It's going to look ugly more often than it doesn't, but there's some leverage to be had.
Yeah, I agree. And Boston's going to be a little bit difficult to get to as well because they're not going to have Bogarts. They don't have Munoz either, I don't believe. It doesn't look like Jack Lopez is in the player pool on DraftKings. So
or FanDuel.
Right. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult just in terms of combinations to stack them on top of, missing one of the most valuable players on that team in Bogarts. But just from an ownership standpoint, Boston right now projected for about 1% aggregate ownership. They have the lowest top stack percentage on the slate. It's not by a wide margin, but it's always crazy when Boston has a lower top stack percentage than Miami. But just in terms of ceiling, I mean, you still have Schwarber, Renfroe, Devers, Martinez. So the ceiling is still relatively high, even though the lineup's watered down. And like you said, McClanahan pulling 40% ownership. I don't mind getting to some Boston just against a popular pitcher. Probably not going to be a huge part of my night, but I would guess that I have more than the field if they really are as low owned as we're projecting right now.
I would certainly like to get more than the field of the Rays bats. Lineup is still quite strong. We're still getting ownership coming into Erod. I don't think the Rays are frequently the top stack, but the combination of the Erod ownership and the fact that the highest owned guy on the Rays is 3.5% owned, that stands out to me. This is my number 1 leverage stack of the day.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. They're a really high upside offense. They're not getting much ownership. I've said it a lot that I think Erod is really good. He's been pretty unlucky this season. 5.12 ERA compared to a 3.48 xFIP. He has allowed 1.2 home runs per 9. And there's just so much power in this Rays lineup that I'm with you. I do think I get to a lot of Tampa Bay here.
It's like I have a Rosarena at 9% coming out of the Sims, 3% owned. Yandy Diaz, 7% coming out of the Sim. He's 1% owned. They're not even all that expensive. Like $5,400 Nelson Cruz, like that's an appropriate price for Nelson Cruz. Nobody's more expensive than that. So I'm happy to get to the Rays. I have them with a 5% chance of being the top stack. That's exactly where we have them in our top stack tool. Seems to me like this is a spot where I would like to get to. So if that Rays low ownership maintains, hell, if Erod's ownership even comes up a little bit, both of those things I think are going to look really nice.
Agreed.
Favorite bat in the game?
Rosarena.
I think, yeah, it's probably a Rosarena for me as well. Just lead off power against the lefty. That all shakes out pretty well. All righty, let's move on to the next one. Cubs and Pirates. 4.3 run implied total for the Cubs, 3.8 for the Pirates. Keegan Thompson, Mitch Keller. Thompson at 9% ownership, Mitch Keller at 25. I think Thompson at 9 is a little high for me. I don't think that he's going to be going deep enough into this game, but maybe you'll tell me different. Mitch Keller showed up in 20% of my sims, so I think his ownership is more than reasonable at 6,200 given the matchup. How are you feeling about either Thompson or Keller, whichever direction you want to go?
Good matchup for both. Thompson has been going a little bit deeper recently, not in terms of innings, but in terms of pitch count. 4 innings and 2 innings in his last 2 appearances, but the 2-inning one was a game where he just pitched really poorly. 73 and 62 pitches. If he's pitching well, gives you 75, 80 pitches, I think that's perfectly fine here. So I actually think he is a little bit under-owned, given that it is a good matchup against the Pirates. I don't think much of Thompson as a pitcher, but still a good matchup against the Pirates, not getting much ownership here. And this does strike me as a slate where it's going to be kind of difficult. You're kind of going to have to take risks to get different, I think. We've already talked about the Tampa Bay and Boston offenses in tough spots at low ownership. That's one way you can go. But when you're looking at pitching, it's kind of just, Carrasco's pulling a ton. The other good pitchers are pulling enough ownership where I don't mind kind of rolling dice on Keegan Thompson here at a really cheap price tag. As far as Keller goes, good matchup for him as well. He is someone that I've always thought should be better. He hasn't been. Strikeout stuff this year hasn't been great either, only a 19.9% strikeout percentage, 5.08 xFIP, 1.25 home runs per 9. But he's inexpensive, does have a good matchup against the Cubs. I think I probably move some of his ownership toward Keegan Thompson if he continues to be projected for basically 3 times the ownership. But I don't really have any issues getting to Keller here against the Cubs.
Okay. How are you feeling about offenses? I have the Pirates 4th. A little bit under-owned. I've got the Cubs 7th, nothing too interesting, but you do get the benefit of Mitch Keller being in 25% of lineups. Talk to me about whichever lineup you want to talk about first.
So neither offense is any good, but
yeah, very true.
Do have the Cubs projected to be a little bit under-owned, and that makes sense with the ownership going to Keller. You have the Pirates projected to be a little bit over-owned, which makes sense because people aren't rostering Keegan Thompson as much. So if that holds, I just anticipate getting to a little bit more of the Cubs. You get some leverage against Keller, who, like I said, he makes sense from a DFS standpoint because of his price and the matchup, but it's not like this is an elite pitcher. It's not going to be surprising at all if he has a bad start here. So going to the Cubs, I think, makes sense with the way ownership looks right now. The Pirates also offer some value. You have Ben Gamel at 2,200, most likely leading off. Brian Reynolds is much better than a $3,800 hitter. Colin Moran is fine. You have Stallings as a cheap catcher option. Tsutsugo has been hitting really well since coming back. So I get why they're getting ownership, and it's not a bad spot against Thompson, but this is just another one of those spots where I don't really have confidence in either side. So I would just rather do the opposite of what the field is doing.
Best play in this game, at least for me right now, is Brian Hayes at just 7.5% ownership. That seems oddly low for a 5-gamer when he's a third baseman that's only 3,600, and it's not like the matchup isn't bad. So I would be happy to get to a little bit more Brian Hayes. I like Pittsburgh, I think, a little bit more than you. We'll see what the Thompson ownership does, but I am a little bit higher on Pittsburgh. And I will say that I did bet on Pittsburgh this morning. I have Pittsburgh as a favorite in this game. They are an underdog, so big swings for me on this one. Anything else that we should touch on for Cubs and Pirates?
No, I think that's it.
Moving along pretty good. Start with some promo codes. You've heard the WR promo code a lot. It's our Awesemo Fantasy Football Draft Kit for season long and for best ball. You get the draft wingman, best ball rankings and stacking guide, trade value chart, and more. Up to a $35 credit for underdog and FFPC leagues. You can get up to 33% off using the promo code WR. That's going to be less than $10 for everything we have to offer for season long and best ball. Or you can get in for some college football. Use the promo code TAILGATE. Get $10 off your first week of Awesemo Plus college football. That's going to be player projections, ownership projections, matchup data, and more. Look into our YouTube chat for Nightbot to drop that link, or browse directly to awesemo.com and sign up using that promo code. That offer is going to be good through Saturday, so you want to make sure you're getting in today. Also, I got to shout out the presenting sponsor, Jock Market. they're changing up fantasy sports a bit. It's going to look a lot more like the stock exchange. You're going to buy and sell shares of players in real time. Not only that, you can short players now. They've just unveiled that feature over the past couple of days. So make sure you're shorting some guys as well. Use the pregame IPO to pick up shares of your players. And then during the game, you can just be sitting on your couch with your phone, actively swapping out, buying and selling individual players' shares. You can download the app in the App Store to get started. Use the promo code Awesemo for up to a $50 bonus on your first deposit. This offer is only good for the Awesemo community, so make sure you're using that promo code and taking advantage of it today for that $50 bonus. 2 more games, man. I like these Thursday slates. Royals in Cleveland. 4.1 run implied total for Kansas City, 3.9 for Cleveland. Mike Minor, Tristan McKenzie. Minor at 31% ownership. I think that's basically reasonable at 7,200. Tristan McKenzie, just 9% ownership at 9,300. I also think that's pretty reasonable. How's the pitching shaking out for you?
My DraftKings froze for me, so I can't pull this up right now.
What do you want to know?
McKenzie was on the injured list, right?
Okay. Well, I thought you were going to ask me like a question.
I have the answer to now, I think.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Okay. So he pitched August 21st through 95 pitches. He was on the 10-day injured list. I'm assuming he's not going to be limited. It was a shoulder thing, so maybe they take it easy on him. But assuming we can get 90 or so pitches from McKenzie, I think he's really underowned here at 9,300 against Kansas City. Like, this team isn't the easiest team to strike out, but they're also not a great offense. And Tristan McKenzie actually has the highest strikeout percentage on this slate at 28.4%. His walk numbers have been better recently. He's been pitching just really well overall. I guess there's some reason for concern just because, again, he was on the injured list with shoulder fatigue, but he's one of Cleveland's top pitching prospects. I assume the fact they're running him out here and, didn't keep him sidelined longer means that he is fine. I can't imagine they're taking risks with him. So assuming he's fine, I think he should be getting a lot more ownership.
I gave him 5 innings. I think I'm a lot higher on the Royals in this spot.
Why did you give him 5 innings?
Why did I give as opposed to
more?
Well, let's take a look. Because I do this relatively blindly, checking very little of the shit that I'm doing at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah,
so
for sure. I was more asking was it an active decision on your part to give him 5 innings, or were you just wrong and you're going to fix it later?
Okay, so the first thing that I do, I'll tell you what I'm doing. You tell me the holes in my thought process out of the gate, but I don't think there are any. But I am open to bumping this one up. I go to FanGraphs probable pitchers page. I do add pitches to the table as well, and I set it to starting and last 2 years, which I know is probably a little bit too long. So what I do is just try to figure out how many outs has this person averaged in all of their starts over the past 2 years. I like to compare it to pitches as well, just to see. And I use all of that reference just to make sure that I'm not looking at just 2 starts. So Tristan McKenzie has made 24 starts over the past rolling 2 years. He's averaged 82 pitches per start and averaged 15 outs. So my first baseline, once I see that it was 24, I go to 15. Now that could very easily mean he wasn't going as deep a year and a half ago and is now, and that average should come up. So I think that would be reasonable to go to a 16 or 17. I also tend to be probably a little bit more pessimistic with the depth that everyone goes in a game in general. Mostly because the left tail is always going to be a lot bigger than the right tail. So 5 innings seemed fine to me. Pitch me on 5 1/3 or 5 2/3. By the way, if I go to 5 1/3, I'd probably have him just about neutrally owned. If I went to 5 2/3, he'd probably be a 15%er for me.
Yeah, I mean, so what you were saying makes sense. I just think you probably run into situations with young pitching prospects that you end up under projecting them if you don't pay attention, because McKenzie, I'm sure, was more limited early on in his career than he has been now. He's gone at least 6 innings in 5 of his last 6. He's throwing a lot of pitches, 95, 106, 86, 90 over his last 4. If you just look at his game log for this year, it's
you can see a very clear trend of additional innings being thrown as of late in comparison to where I have him. It's just not something that I generally dig into all that much to start my day. I appreciate you being the person that's just like, hey, I can look at this more. And like, that's just a change that I'm going to make. Like, If Locke were now, I would do all of that for each pitcher.
Right. Yeah. And I wasn't like, I was basically just asking because like with him coming off the injured list, I didn't know if you just actively thought they were going to limit him or, like I said, if you were just under projecting him for whatever reason. I don't care if you do that, but I just didn't know if like there was something I should know basically.
No. That's fair. It's the selfish question, trying to figure it out for you. No, and I appreciate you pointing it out. It's always good to hear, but it's mostly just kind of painting with a really broad brush early in the morning and making adjustments throughout the day.
Yeah. So anyway, I really, really like McKenzie. If his ownership doesn't come up, I assume I will have a lot. Like, I think he should be probably higher owned than McClanahan and Rodriguez.
Okay, that's aggressive. Even if I did bump him to like 6 innings, which would be kind of wild. I still don't even know if I get him past Erod.
Like, I agree with the top stack or the top pitchers tool. Alex has McKenzie with a 23.9% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. Rodriguez at 25.8, and you're getting 2.5 times the ownership on Rodriguez.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I love McKenzie here if the ownership's going to stay where it is.
I think a lot of this, and let me just dig into. Wow, it's all right. So he's a little bit more of a command guy. That's interesting to see from FanGraphs.
He's a what now?
A little bit more of a command guy.
Tristan McKenzie?
Per the profiles with a 60 command, that's better than any individual pitcher or any individual pitch in that, like where the pitches are shown at the top. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he has like a 12% walk rate this year.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, he's been a lot better recently. He was pitching in the majors early in the year, walking everyone. Really good strikeout stuff, but walking everyone. They sent him back to the minors. They said they fixed him. I didn't really buy into it, but he has been basically fixed since coming back. Looking at his last starts: 1 walk, 0 walk, 1 walk, 0 walks, 3, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Like that's all since coming back from the minors. So he has not had a walk issue since coming back. But yeah, I just you caught me off guard calling him a command guy because his biggest issue has been that he cannot throw the ball where he wants to throw it.
This is really wild to look at. This is starting to feel like one of those first shows that we did. We're doing a little bit of a Tristan McKenzie deep dive. BABIP for his career over 124 innings is 210. That's unsustainable no matter what's going on. All 4 of the projection systems on FanGraphs have him projected in the 4.7 to 4.8 FIP range, which is not great. That right there is the driving force why I am not going to be getting to him more. That FIP is the clear problem in everything I have. Great strikeout matchup. Upside is there if the strikeouts are coming, but not profiling. I mean, he's profiling as worse than an average pitcher.
Which is really weird because he's one of the best pitching prospects in baseball.
Which is really weird for me to look at the way that they have him written up. 50 future value. So we're talking about projecting as an average pitcher, average fastball, below average current slider, at best average slider, a tick above average curveball, average changeup that's below average, slightly higher command. Like it feels like everything that he's done doesn't match what's listed in the way that they're charting out his pitches. Like none of this is jiving together at all.
Yeah, it is weird, but I mean, like the numbers have been there through the minors. Like the strikeout numbers are insane. It's basically just been a walk thing for him, and he's gotten that under control recently. I think he's really good.
Like if you cover up the ranking of the prospect and just look at the way that his pitches are graded and the way that they graded him out, you would never say that this is a team's number 1 prospect or the 58th best prospect in baseball. Like those things don't compute. Not having no pitch better than a 55, like I would never expect that guy to be in anywhere near the top of anything.
But I mean, he's 24 years old and striking out 28.5% of hitters in basically his first full season in the major leagues. He's got like a 12.5% swinging strike percentage. The stuff is obviously really good.
Oh yeah, like I like the actual data that he's producing on the mound is great to see. I would look at him very differently. But if you were just looking at that prospect report, you'd be like, this isn't a number 1 guy. Like none of these, he doesn't profile to have like an out pitch. Like none of it.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. Like, yeah, if you're just looking at like, if you go on Fangraphs, like if you had no idea who Tristan McKenzie was and you go on Fangraphs and you look at the, stuff across the board, it would just be like, yeah, okay, this is some average dude.
Yeah. Like it almost makes me feel like the way that his pitches are being profiled is pulling for the wrong dude. Because this doesn't match the things that he has actually done on the mound.
I'm also perfectly comfortable just saying that scouts kind of suck and he's like, these are probably just bad rankings.
How bad could you be at scouting if you've got a guy that's going out there and mowing down, 30% of hitters across the minors for the past 4.5 years. And then all of a sudden it's just like, he's got a 50 fastball and a 50 slider and a 50 curve. Like none of it's there. Very interesting. I don't know what to do with McKenzie. I'm at least interested in him more so than I was previously. The FIP is going to nerf him a bit, but strikeouts are all right. What about Minor at 30% ownership?
I understand why he's getting it because that price tier is kind of empty, but like he's just an average pitcher to me. I guess he's being owned about where he should be when you consider the value aspect. 23.9% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. He's inexpensive. It's going to help you get bats into your lineup. Just kind of an average guy. I think average-ish matchup as well. Ramirez and Reyes can do some damage, but overall it's just sort of a middle-of-the-road offense for Cleveland. I don't really have a strong take either way on Minor. I assume I'll be around the field on him, but, again, absolutely love Tristan McKenzie.
We have Tristan McKenzie projected a full fantasy point ahead of Mike Minor. I have Minor 0.6 ahead right now, just to put that in perspective. So I guess I'm lighter on Tristan McKenzie. Hopefully, I feel pretty good about it though. Like ultimately you're going to be wrong and I'm going to be right. I just feel very confident. And here's why. And I think you're going to agree with me. McKenzie will absolutely be the highest scoring pitcher on the slate. I'll let you figure out who that quote is from. But I assume you're not as happy about having Tristan McKenzie. I
already saw it, but yeah, me and Sean V are on the same page on McKenzie here. I mean, I'm not saying absolutely the top scorer on the slate, but yeah, we're in sync on our Tristan McKenzie love.
Yeah, is that a place you want to be? Doesn't that make you feel wrong?
I mean, the alternative is being with you, so kind of lose situation here.
You're gonna sit this slate out tonight, aren't you?
Yeah.
All right, let's talk bats here. I have Cleveland 5th overall. I see them as relatively properly owned, but you do get the benefit of having 30% owned Mike Minor. On the opposite side, and I think this is going to obviously go a different direction for me, I have the Royals as my number 3 stack and my number 2 leverage stack. I think that they are under-owned based on the premise that Tristan McKenzie is a 4.75 FIP. So either side of hitting for me, go.
I think you're out of your mind. Kansas City is over-owned. I agree with the top stack tool here. 8.5% chance of being the top stack is third highest. I think that should probably actually be lower, but I get it when you have some of the really bad offenses that you do on this slate, but we have them projected for 10% aggregate ownership. This is another reason I think McKenzie looks even better. You're not getting ownership on McKenzie. You are getting too much going to Kansas City. The way things look right now, like I understand why the Royals are getting it because they are cheap. Again, alternative offenses are Pittsburgh, the Cubs. They're both terrible. The Rays Red Sox game has really difficult matchups. You have the Marlins on the slate. I get why people are going to Kansas City. They're really inexpensive with the exception of Perez and Merrifield, basically. Mondesi's back in the lineup. He gives you stolen base upside. I understand why the ownership's there, but right now I would just be playing a lot of Tristan McKenzie and not as much Kansas City.
And we talk about this a lot, but the ownership is a tad skewed. Whit Merrifield is pulling 23% ownership in the leadoff spot. Salvador Perez, as an individual catcher, obviously nuking the ball right now, is projected for 16% ownership. Everyone else is in single digits, 9 or below, a lot of like 2s and 4s as well. So it's not truly like stack ownership clean across the board for the Royals. It is pulling in 2 separate ways that, I mean, I don't think that you and I are surprised to see Whit Merrifield or Salvador Perez be chalkier today.
No, not at all.
Those numbers make sense. So
yeah.
It's not as bad as it seems in the surface from an aggregate perspective.
Yeah, that's fair too. And again, they offer really good value. Carlos Santana shouldn't be 2,700. Benintendi at 3,200. I mean, it's a really cheap offense outside of those two. So I understand why people are getting there. But again, if ownership continues to hold how it is, I would just be getting it makes sense logically in my head too. Like I'm going to get more McKenzie. I'm going to get less Rodriguez and McClanahan. I'm going to get more Red Sox and Rays. I'm going to get less Kansas City.
Yeah. That all makes it follows the correct path. Once you have one of those items start, once you're saying like, I'm going to get more Tristan McKenzie, you're naturally going to get less Royals by default. Then we're looking at the top stack tool. It's sort of what we talked about for the 3-gamer. Then you look at the top stack tool, see that the Royals are over-owned. You're going to get less Royals there, which in turn is like a circular reference of getting more McKenzie again.
Right.
So we're in the same. I understand where you're coming from. The McKenzie FIP is the driver of everything for me right now. I don't have anything else for Royals Cleveland. This one's interesting. This might be the swing game for the day. This one has like the most ambiguity. Like Rays Red Sox has it, but it's because both pitchers are getting ownership and both offenses are good. It's a weird game, but everybody knows those pieces. Royals in Cleveland, this could break a couple different ways and really impact the slate.
Yeah, I agree with you. But like you said, like, it has the ambiguity. This is one, like, I feel so confident, like with the way things look right now, I feel so confident that the McKenzie side is the correct side. Whereas the Tampa Bay Boston game, I'm just like, yeah, I have no idea. Somebody's going to do well. I don't know who.
I'm anxious to see how this ends up playing out. I think we're on to our final.
What's going to happen is we're going to get closer to lock. McKenzie's ownership is going to jump to like 25%. This whole conversation was pointless.
And you won't be on the deeper dive to like save it. So if something's going to happen, you're going to get like people are going to hear this and go for it. And it's just gonna be like, no, I ended up playing 2% of him. He was over-owned.
Well, and to be clear, like I'm still fine with him at like 20 to 25%, but like this whole ownership conversation is just going to be pointless when it gets updated and he's like the same as Eduardo Rodriguez.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's talk about the elephant in the room. 5.7 run implied total for the Rockies, 6.8 for the Braves. Chichi Gonzalez and Tuki Toussaint. This is going to be an interesting conversation. Do you roster Chichi Gonzalez at all?
I don't think so. Like, I would just use Keegan Thompson right now, I think. I get it on like the thought process on Chichi Gonzalez would be the Braves are projected for 35% ownership. If they somehow fail, $5,100 Chichi Gonzalez probably came through, but I don't think I get there.
Okay. Tuki Toussaint is pulling no ownership right now, and that is a little surprising to me. So I have this game as a whole projected very differently. I have the total a lot less than 12.5. I've got the Rockies a full run below where they are because I think Toussaint is average, and this Rockies offense sucks. Luckily, they are at home, though, so that is a little bit helpful considering we talked about the home and away splits for the Rockies. I think the Braves are probably a little overrated from a lineup perspective here as well, but not nearly as much as the Rockies. So I am lighter on the total in this game in the aggregate. I think Toussaint should be getting a little bit more ownership than the 1% he's showing, as does our top pitcher tool.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's just no real reason he should only get 1 or 2% ownership because, like, I understand if you're playing one lineup or something, you're probably not going to go to Toussaint. But if you're someone playing a lot of lineups, there's really no reason not to be getting more of him because you're going to have a lot of lineups that don't have Colorado hitters. Toussaint does have almost a 25% strikeout percentage this year. Clearly, it's a bad park to pitch in, and we know Colorado's strikeout percentage at home is like 7 points lower than on the road. But in lineups where you don't have Colorado, who has the second highest top stack percentage on the slate and is projected for the second most ownership, for example, like your lineup is more powerful. Like if you have a lineup that doesn't have the Rockies, your lineup is going to be like have a clearer path to winning if you have Tuki Toussaint than if you have Mike Minor, for example. Not saying, that I think he projects better than Minor or anything like that, but you're already this lineup is being built with the assumption that the Rockies don't do well. If the Rockies don't do well, there's a good chance Toussaint is doing well. It just makes more sense to have Toussaint in those lineups. So not saying, every lineup you don't have the Rockies should have Toussaint or anything, but I just think he should be a lot more than 1% owned.
Showed up in 10% of my sims. I'd be very happy with that given today. I wouldn't even be mad about having a little bit more. But I think the bigger question, the reason everybody is here, we held it till the end. What do we do with the Atlanta Braves who are, if you play DFS and look at this today and have any other team as your top stack, just as odds of being the top stack, you should never play DFS again, or you should only send us whatever you're trying to do. They are the number one team. I have them with a 30% chance of being the top stack. Top stack tool has it even higher than that. I have them over-owned, but unquestionably the best thing that you could have today. How do you handle the Braves on a 5-gamer in this situation?
Mix them in with low-owned guys. Keegan Thompson, Tuki Toussaint, maybe Tristan McKenzie if that holds. It's tough because there's nobody right now on this team projected to be low owned either. It's not one of these spots where you can just point to someone and say, okay, I'll hold my nose and go to this guy. The lowest owned hitter right now is Adam Duvall at 28.5%. So this is a situation where, for one, it matters the size tournaments you're playing, because if you're playing, the ownership will be higher in a 3 max and single entry also. But like in those, at least, the raw number of lineups you're competing with, if you stack the Braves and the Braves go off, is relatively low. In larger field tournaments, it's, they're projected to be a little bit under owned, but you're still competing with like 1/3 of the tournament if they go off. So typically what ends up happening for me in a situation like this is I'll end up around the field in terms of rostering these guys a lot, but it also typically ends up being a lot more mini stacking, using lower owned full stacks, using lower owned pitching. Definitely pay attention to the total ownership of your lineup, because you need to be somewhere different. Like, you can't just go Carrasco, Braves, Kansas City and call it a day. Yeah. Like, you're going to be overlapping with so many people. It's going to be so hard to win.
Yeah. Well, you're putting that lineup in what's called a head-to-head or a double up. Because that is a very good baseline for cash games. Is a 5-team Brave or 5-man Brave stack going to be like cash nuts today?
I would assume so.
That's insane. It's so crazy. They're popping this is one of the bigger ownerships that I've seen on a 5-gamer, because the disparity is massive. The highest implied total for any other team on the slate that isn't in this game is 4.3. Like, they're 2.5 runs above that. You got to have them, clearly, but
yeah,
you gotta
they actually end up being a little bit. They actually end up being more underpriced too, because Ozzy Albies isn't expected to play today. So there's a good chance you're going to get like Jock Peterson at the top of the lineup at like 3,900. For some reason, Soler is only 4K anyway. You get a 2K Adrianza potentially in the lineup. So
with dual eligibility, no less.
Yeah. I still don't know what DraftKings is doing with Coors Field pricing. Like, they've been so off on some of these guys. You see it on the other side too with Tapia at 3,900. But I would assume cash lineups are just 5-man Brave stacks.
How are you feeling about the Colorado side of this game? Obviously a tougher pitching matchup, obviously a significantly shittier offense. They are still my number 2 overall stack. I have them pretty aggressively over-owned. I want them less than I want Atlanta by many multiples.
Yeah, it's just going to feel a little bit better not being there. Like, Atlanta is just in such a good spot, whereas Colorado, it's weaker hitters. It's a more difficult matchup. 5.5 implied run total for the Rockies is obviously high, but it's not like it's a crazy Coors Field run total or anything like that. It's right now, I think they look over-owned. I would, like I said, still be getting a lot of Braves bats just in lineups where I have low-owned hitters elsewhere. I'll take some of that Rockies exposure, move it, to teams like Cleveland against Minor, to, the Mets against Thompson or whoever's pitching for Miami, to Tampa Bay, to Boston. I feel pretty, like, the way things look right now, I would end up not getting as much Colorado as the field. I'd be around the field on Atlanta, I think, just, again, paying attention to who I'm pairing them with.
This one's really weird. I'm not entirely sure what's driving this Rockies run total. Like, I've got their offense projected to be about like 11% worse than average, which is sort of what happens to runs the opposite direction being in course, it's basically just north of 11% bump up. So to me, that's neutral. I'm projecting the Rockies as like an average offense. And I think Tuki Toussaint is like an average pitcher, but for some reason we're not getting an average projected run total for the Rockies. They're getting an extra run altogether. I don't know if it's like a weather.
I think it's a pretty average given Coors Field. Like, you're never getting a 4.5 implied run total for the Rockies there.
Right. But that's what I'm saying. Like, I have the Rockies as like, the park is saving their lineup to make them average because they're not. Like, maybe this is a case where I'm not giving them enough of a bump for being at home because of how bad they are on the road. That could be a piece of this. Maybe I'm overrating Tuki Toussaint a bit. I don't see how I get to 5.7 given this scenario, because this team stinks.
They do.
So I'm not sure. It's something I'm going to pay attention to. But for right now, I think the Rockies are the team that I get away from in the easiest mechanism possible. And I would like to get a little bit more Tuki Toussaint, which helps that out quite a bit. 5 games up, 5 games down. Interesting.
This seems like a really interesting tournament slate.
I'm very excited to play it, actually. It's going to be an interesting balance. I assume the Marlins end up being the top stack and take a steaming dump on everybody. So there's also that. I'd say sum it up, but I think we kind of hit on all of it. Deep dive for you today? Yeah,
deep dive article will be out. Apparently no deeper dive show for me. So I'll get that done. And then you won't hear from me until the morning. Or no, the football show tonight.
Yes. So you probably won't hear from you all that much because you'll be doing best ball drafts while that happens.
Yeah, for sure.
There we go, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Look at that. 5-game slate. We still got here for an hour, giving you the goods. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, notification bell, all that good stuff. Shout out to Jock Market for being the presenting sponsor of the show. We'll have content throughout the day. We already told you. Scroll back a little bit and figure out what the schedule is for the rest of the day. But we will talk to you later. Good luck tonight.